Yeah. So, hello to anyone who is here. As always, I've no idea if you are. And welcome once again to the stream. My name, as it always is SkitterSkreetch. Except for the times when it's not, but we don't talk about those. You can call me Skitter. And today we will be continuing on with our reading of The Sea Wolf by Jack London. Now again, I say for any of you who have...
the rat!
Nice to see you, Les. Yeah. Always nice to know someone here. What was I saying? Ah, yes. So we're going on with The Sea Wolf. This is the third of our streams of it, after the marathon one on Wednesday, and then our slight continuing yesterday when my voice gave out. So if you haven't read it, I really got to stop doing this before I start streaming. Yeah, if you haven't seen these, don't. You should leave now. I say, driving away my very low viewership. But yeah, we have had two of these before, so if you're not caught up, you may not be able to follow along, but we'll try our best. But yeah, let's move over to the book. Now, last we left off, let's see what happened during our last session. Humphry, Weyden and I made sort of an agreement with the visiting woman, Maud, and they agreed to sort of hold their tongue about Wolf Larson's more outrageous behaviour. They ran afoul of Wolf Larson's brother, Death Larson, who interfered with their sealing run, and Wolf Larson responded by kidnapping and shanghaiing about half of his hunters in his crew. The crew took a terrible drunk, and then Wolf Larson was struck down by some sort of ailment. I think it was one of his headaches, but was never explicitly stated. And during the confusion, Humphry has taken the time to load a boat and make for mainland Japan. And he had just set out last we left off. So we'll be continuing from chapter 27 and pushing on till we can no longer feel able to continue. Hopefully we'll get it done tonight. If not, it'll probably be one more stream. So, unless anyone has something they want me to say or do beforehand, of course, as always, if you need me to go back over or repeat something, if you missed something, or if you're just confused on a point, feel free to let me know. Same if you have any thoughts or comments on the book. I'd like to have some discussion. But unless there's anything else, without further ado, I shall begin. Chapter 27. Day broke, grey and chill. The boat was close hauled on a fresh breeze, and the compass indicated to us that we were just making the course which would bring us to Japan. I was stoutly mittened, my fingers were cold, and they pained from the grip of the steering oar. My feet were stinging from the bite of the frost, and I hoped fervently that the sun would shine. Before me, in the bottom of the boat, lay Maud. She at least were warm, for under her and over her were thick blankets. The top one I had drawn over her face to shelter it from the night, so I could see nothing but the vague shape of her and her light brown hair, escaped from the covering and jewelled with moisture from the air. Long I looked at her, dwelling upon the one visible bit of her as only a man who deemed it the most precious thing in the world. So insistent was my gaze that at last she stirred under the blankets. The top fold were thrown back and she smiled out on me, her eyes yet heavy with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Van der Weyden," she said. "Have you sighted land yet?" "No," I answered. "We're approaching it at a rate of 6 miles an hour." She made a moan of disappointment. That is equivalent to 144 miles in 24 hours, I added reassuringly. Her face brightened. "And how far have we to go?" "Siberia lays off there," I said, pointing to the west. "At the southwest, some 600 miles, is Japan. If this wind should hold, we'll make it in 5 days. And if it storms, the boat could not live." She had a way of looking one in the eyes and demanding the truth, and thus she looked at me as she asked the question. "It would have to storm very hard," I temporised. "And if it storms very hard?" I nodded my head. "But we may be picked up at any moment by a sealing schooner. They are plentifully distributed over this part of the ocean." "Why, you are chilled through," she cried. "Look, you are shivering. Don't deny it, you are. And here I have been lying warm as toast." "I don't see that it would help matters if you do sit up and were chilled," I laughed. "It will, though, when I learn to steer, which I certainly shall." She sat up and began making her simple toilet. She shook down her hair, and it fell about her in a brown cloud, hiding her face and shoulders. Dear damp brown hair. I wanted to kiss it, to ripple it through my fingers, to bury my face in it. I gazed entranced till the boat ran into the wind, and the flapping sail warned me I was not attendant to my duties. Idealist and romanticist that I was, and always had been, in spite of my analytical nature, yet I failed till now in grasping how much of the physical characteristics of love. The love of man and woman I had always held was a sublimated thing, related to spirit, a spiritual bond that linked and drew their souls together. The bonds of the flesh had little part in my cosmos of love. but I was learning the sweet lesson for myself that the soul transmuted itself, expressed itself through the flesh, and the sight and sense and touch of the loved one's air were as much a breath and voice and essence of the spirit as the light that shone from the eyes and the thoughts that fell from the lips. After all, pure spirit were unknowable, a thing to be sensed and divined only, nor could it express itself in terms of itself. Jehovah were anthropomorphic because he could address himself to the Jews only in terms of their understanding, so he was conceived as in their own image, as a cloud, a pillar of fire, a tangible physical something which the minds of the Israelites could grasp. And so I gazed upon Maud's light brown hair, and loved it, and learned more of love than all the poets and singers had taught me with all their songs and sonnets. She flung it back with a sudden adroit movement, and her face emerged, smiling. Why don't women wear their hair down always? I asked. It's so much more beautiful. If it didn't tangle so dreadfully, she laughed. There, I've lost one of my precious hairpins. I neglected the boat, and had the sail spill in the wind again and again, touched with my delight in following her every movement as she searched through the blankets for the pin. I was surprised and joyful that she was so much the woman, and the display of each trait and mannerism that was characteristically feminine gave me a keener joy, for I had been elevating her too highly in my concepts of her, removing her too far from the plane of the human, and too far from me. I had been making her a creature goddess-like and unapproachable, so I hailed with delight the little traits that proclaimed her only a woman after all, such as the toss of the head, which flung back the cloud of hair, and search for the pin. She were woman, my kind on my plane. This delightful intimacy of kind, the man and woman, were possible, as well as the reverence and awe in which I knew I should always hold her. She found the pin with an adorable little cry, and I turned my attention more fully to my steering. I proceeded to experiment, lashing and wedging the steering oar until the boat held on fairly well by the wind without my assistance. Occasionally it came up too close or fell too freely, but it always recovered itself, and in the main behaved satisfactorily. And now we shall have breakfast, I said. But first you must be more warmly clad. I'll get out an heavy shirt, new from the slop chest, and made from blanket goods. I knew the kind, so thick and coarse a texture that it could resist the rain and not be soaked through after hours of wetting. When she had slipped on the cap over her head, I exchanged the boy's cap she wore for a man's cap. When she had slipped this on over her head, I exchanged the boy's cap she wore for a man's cap, large enough to cover her hair, and when the flap would turn down, completely cover her neck and ears. The effect was charming. Her face was the sort that cannot but look well under normal circumstances. Nothing could destroy its exquisite oval, its well-known classic lines, its deliciously stenciled brows, its large brown eyes, clear, seeing, and calm, gloriously calm. A puff, slightly stronger than usual, struck us just then. The boat were caught as it obliquely crossed the crest of a wave. It went over suddenly, burying its gunwale level with the sea and shipping a bucketful or so of water. I were opening a can of tongue at the moment. I sprang from the sheet and cast it off just in time. The sail flapped and fluttered, and the boat paid off. A few minutes of regulating sufficed to put it in its course again, and when I returned to the preparation of breakfast. It does very well, seems, though I'm not versed in things nautical, she said, nodding her head with grave approval at my steering contrivance. It will serve only when we're sailing by the wind, I explained. When running more freely with the wind astern, abeam, or on the quarter, it will be necessary for me to steer. I must say I don't understand your technicalities, she said, but I do your conclusion, and I don't like it. You cannot steer night and day and forever, so I shall expect after breakfast to receive my first lessons, and then you shall lie down and sleep, or stand watches just as they do on ships. I don't say I'm to teach you, I made protest. I'm just learning for myself. You little thought when you trusted yourself to me that I had no experience whatever with small boats. This is the first time I ever been on one. Then we'll learn together, sir. And since you've had a night's start, you shall teach me what you have learned. And now breakfast. My, this air does give one an appetite. No coffee, I said regretfully, passing her buttered sea biscuits and a slice of canned tongue. And there will be no tea, no soups, nothing hot till we have made land somewhere, somehow. After the simple breakfast, capped with a cup of cold water, Maud took her lesson in steering. In teaching her, I learned quite a deal myself, although I applying the knowledge already acquired by sailing the Ghost and bar watching the boat steerers and sailed the small boats. She were an apt pupil, and soon learned to keep the course, to luff in the puffs, and to cast off the sheet in an emergency. Having grown tired, apparently, of the task, she relinquished the oar to me. I had folded up the blankets, but she now proceeded to spread them out on the bottom. When all were arranged snugly, she said, "Now, sir, to bed, and you shall sleep until luncheon, till dinner time," she corrected, remembering the arrangement on the Ghost. What could I do? She insisted and said, "Please, please," whereupon I turned the oar over to her and obeyed. I experienced a positive, sensuous delight as I crawled into the bed she had made with her hands. The calm and control, which was so much a part of her, seemed to have been communicated to the blanket, so they were aware of a soft dreaminess and content of an oval face and brown eyes framed in a fisherman's cap, and tossing against a background a now grey cloud, now grey sea. And then I were aware that I'd been asleep. I looked at my watch. It was 1 o'clock. I'd slept 7 hours, and she had been steering 7 hours. As I took the steering oar, I had first to unbend her cramped fingers. Her modicum of strength had been exhausted, and she were unable even to move from her position. I was compelled to let go of the sheet while I helped her to the nest of blankets and chafed her hands and arms. "I am so tired," she said with a quick intake of breath and sigh, drooping her head wearily. But she straightened in the next moment. "Oh, don't scold, don't you dare scold," she cried with mock defiance. "I hope my face does not appear angry," I answered seriously, "for I assure you I am not in the least angry." "No," she considered, "it looks only reproachful." "Then it is an honest face, for it looks what I feel. You are not fair to yourself nor to me. How can I ever trust you again?" She looked penitent. "I'll be good," she said, as a naughty child might say. "I promise." "To obey as a sailor would obey his captain?" "Yes," she answered. "It was stupid of me, I know." "Then you must promise me something else," I ventured. "Readily. That you will not say please, please too often. For when you do, you are sort of override my authority." She laughed with amused appreciation. She too had noticed the power of the repeated please. "It is a good word," I began, "but I must not overwork it," she broke in. But she laughed weakly, and her head dropped again. I left the oar long enough to tuck the blankets about her feet, and to pull a single fold across her face. Alas, she were not strong. I looked with misgivings towards the southwest, and thought of the 600 miles of hardship before us. Aye, if it were no worse than hardship. On this sea a storm might blow up at any moment and destroy us, and yet I were unafraid. I were without confidence in my future, extremely doubtful, and yet I felt no underlying fear. It must come right, it must come right, I repeated to myself over and over again. The wind freshened in the afternoon, raising a stiffer sea and trying the boat and me severely. But the supply of food and the 9 breakers of water enabled the boat to stand up to the sea and wind, and I held on as long as I dared. Then I removed the spirit, lightly hauling down the peak of the sail, and we raced along under what sailors call a leg of mutton. Late in the afternoon, I sighted a steamer smoke on the horizon to leeward, and I knew it for either a Russian cruiser, or more likely the Macedonia still seeking the ghost. The sun had not shone all day, and it had been bitter cold. As night drew on, the clouds darkened, and the wind freshened, so that when Maud and I ate supper, it were with our mittens on, while me still steering and eating morsels between puffs. By the time it was dark, wind and sea had become too strong for the boat, and I reluctantly took in the sail and set about making a drag or sea anchor. I had learned the device from the taught hunters, and it was a simple thing to manufacture. Firming the sail and lashing it securely about the mast, boom, spirit, and 2 pairs of spare oars, I threw it overboard. A line connected it to the bow. As it floated low in the water, practically unexposed to the wind, it drifted less rapidly than the boat. In consequence, it held the boat bow onto the sea and wind, the safest position in which to escape being swamped when the sea is breaking into whitecaps. "And now?" Maud asked cheerfully when the task was accomplished and I pulled on my mitts. "And now we are no longer moving towards Japan," I answered. "I've drifted to the southeast or south-southeast at the rate of at least 2 miles an hour." "That will be only 24 miles," she urged, "if the wind remains high all night." "Yes, and only 140 miles if it continues for 3 days and nights." "It won't continue," she said with easy confidence. "It will turn around and blow fair." "The sea is the great faithless one." "But the wind," she retorted. "I have heard you grow eloquent over the brave trade wind." "Wish I had thought to bring Wolf Larson's chronometer and sextant," I said still gloomily. "Sail in one direction, drift in another direction, to say nothing of the set of the current in some third direction, makes a resultant which dead reckoning can never calculate. Before long we won't know where we are by 500 miles. Then I begged her pardon and promised I should not be disheartened any more. At her solicitation, I let her take the watch till midnight. It was then 9 o'clock, but I wrapped her in blankets and put an oarskin about her before I lay down. I slept only in cat naps. The boat were leaping and pounding as it fell over the crests. I could hear the seas rushing past. The spray were continually being thrown overboard. And still it were not a bad night, I mused, nothing of the nights I had been through on the Ghost. Nothing perhaps the nights we should go through in this cockleshell. This planking with 3/4 of an inch thick. Between us and the bottom of the sea were less than an inch of wood. And yet I aver, and I aver it again, I were unafraid. The death which Wolf Larson and even Thomas Mugridge made me fear, I no longer feared. The coming of Maud Brewster into my life seemed to have transformed me. After all, I thought, it is better in finding a love than to be loved, if it makes something in life so worthwhile that one is not loath to die for it. I forget my own life for the love of another life, and yet, such is the paradox, I never wanted so much to live as right now, when place the least value upon my own life. I never had so much reason for living as was my concluding thought, and after that, until I dozed, I contented myself with trying to pierce the darkness to where I knew Maud crouched low in the stern sheets, watchful of the foaming sea and ready to call me at an instant's notice. That's the end of chapter 27. We see them coming to grips with the little boat, and we see Humphry and Weyden becoming more and more, or waxing more and more poetic on his, on the nature of his love. But yeah. Trying to think what else there is of note in this chapter. Don't think it's too much. The sea anchor is interesting. I'm not familiar with the technique. I've done a little sailing in my time, have I? So can't say I've got too much to comment on. As is the point about dead reckoning. The fact that they don't know where they are is notable. We see a distant steamship. It's notable. Probably the the brother. Yeah. Not too much to say, really. We'll see how things get on. So I'll have my little drink of water and press onward. Chapter 28. There is no need of going into an extended recital of our suffering in a small boat during the many days we were driven and drifted here and there, willy-nilly across the ocean. The hour wind blew from the northwest for 24 hours, when it fell calm and in the night sprang up from the southwest. This would deaden our teeth, but I took in the sea anchor and set sail, all on a course on the wind which took us in a south-southwesterly direction. It were an even choice between this and the west-northwesterly course which the wind permitted, but the warm airs of the south found my desire for a warmer sea and swayed my decision. In 3 hours it was midnight, I well remember, as dark as I ever seen it on the sea. The wind still blowing out of southwest rose furiously, and once again I was compelled to set the sea anchor. Day broke and found me one-eyed and the ocean lashed white, a boat pitching almost on end to its drag. We were in imminent danger of being swamped by the whitecaps. As it were, spray and spume came aboard in such quantities that I bailed without cessation. The blankets were soaking, everything were wet except Maud, and she in oilskins, rubber boots and a sou'wester were dry all but her face and hands, and a stray wisp of air. She relieved me at the bailing hole from time to time, and bravely she threw out the water and faced the storm. All things are relative. We're no more than a stiff blow, but to us, fighting for life in our frail craft, it were indeed a storm. Cold and cheerless, the wind beating on our faces, the white sea roaring bar, we struggled through the day. Night come, but neither of us slept. Day come, and still the wind beat on our faces, and the white sea roared past. By the second night, Maud were falling asleep from exhaustion. I covered her with oilskins and tarpaulin. She were comparatively dry, though she were numb with the cold. I feared greatly that she might die in the night. The day broke, cold and cheerless, with the same clouded sky and beating wind and roaring seas. I had no sleep for 48 hours. I was wet and chilled to the marrow, till I felt more dead than alive. My body was stiff from exhaustion as well as from cold, and my aching muscles gave me the severest torture whenever I used them, and used them continually. And all the time we were being driven off into the northeast, directly away from Japan and towards the Black Barren Sea. And still we lived, and the boat lived, and the wind blew unbated. In fact, towards nightfall of the third day, it increased a trifle, something more. The boat's bow plunged under a crest, and we came through a quarter full of water. I bailed like a madman. The liability of shipping another such sea were enormously increased by the water that weighed the boat down and robbed it of its buoyancy. And another such sea meant the end. When I had the boat empty again, I was forced to take away with the tarpaulin, which covered Maud, in order that I might lash it down across the bow. It was well I did, for it covered the boat fully a third of the way off, and 3 times in the next several hours it flung off the bulk of the down rushing water when the bow shoved under the sea. Maud's condition was pitiable. She sat crouched in the bottom of the boat, her lip blue, her face grey, and plainly showing the pain she suffered. But ever her eyes looked bravely at me, and ever her lips uttered brave words. The worst of the storm must have blown through that night, though little I noticed it. I succumbed and slept where I sat in the stern sheets. The morning of the 4th day found the wind diminished to a gentle whisper, the sea dying down, the sun shining upon us. Ah, the blessed sun! How we bathed our poor bodies in its delicious warmth, reviving like bugs crawling things after a storm. We smiled again, and said amusing things, and waxed optimistic over our situation. Yet were, if anything, worse than ever. We were further from Japan than the night we left the Ghost. Nor could I more than roughly guess our latitude and longitude. A calculation of 2 mile drift per hour, as during the 70-odd hours of the storm we had been driven at least 150 miles to the northeast. Or was such a calculated drift correct? For all I knew, it might have been 4 miles an hour instead of 2, in which case we were another 150 miles to the bad. Where we were, I know not, though there were quite a likelihood that we were in the vicinity of the coast. There were seals about us, and I was prepared to sight a sealing schooner at any time. We did sight one in the afternoon, when the northwest breeze had sprung up freshly once more. But the strange schooner lost herself on the skyline, and we alone occupied the circle of the sea. Come days of fog when even Maud's spirits drooped, and there were no merry words upon her lips. Days of calm when we floundered on the when we floated on the lonely immensity of the sea, oppressed by its greatness and yet marvelling at the miracle of tiny life. But we still lived and struggled to live. Days of sleet and wind and snow squalls, when nothing could keep us warm, or days of drizzling rain when we filled our water breakers from the drip of wet sail. And ever I loved Maud with an increasing love. She was so many-sided, so many-mooded. Protean-mooded I called her, but I called her this, and the other dearer things in my thoughts only. Though the declaration of my love urged and trembled on my tongue 1,000 times, I knew that there was no time for such a declaration. If for no other reason, it was no time when one would protecting and trying to save a woman to ask that woman for her love. Delicate as was the situation, not alone in this but in other ways, I flattered myself that I were able to deal delicately with it, and also I flattered myself that by look or sign I gave no advertisement of the love I felt for her. We were like good comrades, and we grew better comrades as the day went by. One thing about her which surprised me was her lack of timidity and fear. The terrible sea, the frail boat, the storms, the suffering, the strangeness and isolation of the situation. All that should have frightened the robust woman, seemed to make no impression upon her, who had known life only in its most sheltered and consummately artificial aspects, and who was herself all fire and dew and mist, sublimated spirit, all that was soft and tender and clinging in woman. And yet I am wrong. She were timid and afraid, but she possessed courage. The flesh and the qualms of the flesh she were heir to, but the flesh bore heavily only on the flesh. And she was spirit, first and always spirit, etherealized essence of life, calm as calm eyes, and sure of permanence in the changing order of the universe. Come days of storm, days and nights of storm, when the ocean menaced us with its roaring whiteness, and the wind smote the struggling boat with Titan's buffets, and ere we were flung off farther and further to the north-east. They were in such a storm, and the worst that we had experienced, that I cast a weary glance to leeward, not in quest of anything, but more from the weariness of facing the elemental strife, and a mute appeal almost to the wrathful powers to cease and let us be. What I saw could not at first be believed. Days and nights of sleeplessness and anxiety had doubtless turned my head. I looked back at Maud to identify myself, as it were, in time and space. The sight of her dear wet cheeks, her flying hair, and her brave brown eyes convinced me that my vision was still healthy. Again I turned the face to leeward, and again I saw the jutting promontory, black and iron naked, raging stiff, that broke about its base and beat its front high up with spouting water fountains, a black and forbidden coastline running towards the southeast and frigated or infringed with a tremendous scarf of white. Maud, I said. Maud. She turned her head to be able to say. It cannot be Alaska, she cried. Alas, no, I answered, and asked, Can you swim? She shook her head. Neither can I said. So we must get ashore without swimming, and some opening between the rocks, through which we can drive the boat and clamber out. But we must be quick, most quick and sure. I spoke with a confidence she knew I did not feel, for she looked at me with the unfaltering gaze of hers and said, I have not thanked you yet for all you have done for me, but... She hesitated, as in doubt how to best word her gratitude. Well, I said brutally, for I'm not quite pleased with her thanking me. You might help me, she smiled. To acknowledge your obligations before you die. Not all. We are not going to die. We shall land on that island, and we shall be snug and sheltered before the day is done. I spoke stoutly, but I did not believe a word, nor I prompted a lie through fear. I felt no fear, though I was sure of death in that boiling sturge among the rocks, which were rapidly growing nearer. It were impossible to sail and claw off that shore. The wind would instantly capsize the boat. The seas would swamp it in a moment. It fell to the trough. And besides, the sail, lashed to the spare oars, dragged in the sea ahead of us. As I say, I was not afraid to meet my own death there, a few hundred yards to leeward, but I was appalled at the thought that Maud must die. My cursed imagination saw her beaten and mangled against the rocks, and it was too terrible. I strove to compel myself to think we would make the landing safely, and so I spoke not what I believed, but what I preferred to believe. I recoiled before contemplation of that frightful death, and for a moment I entertained the wild idea of seizing Maud in my arms and leaping overboard. Then I resolved to wait, and at last moment, when we entered the final stretch, to take her in my arms, proclaim my love, and with her in my embrace to make the desperate struggle and dive. Instinctively we grew closer together in the bottom of the boat. I felt her mittened hand come out of mine, and thus without speech we waited the end. We were not far off the line the wind made with the western edge of the promontory, and I watched in the open that some set of the current or send of the sea would drift us past before we reached the surf. We shall go clear, I said with confidence which I knew deceived neither of us. By God, we will go clear, I cried 5 minutes later. The oath left my lips in excitement. The first I do believe in my life, unless trouble it, an expletive in my youth, is accounted an oath. I beg your pardon, I said. You've convinced me of your sincerity, she said with a faint smile. I do know now that we shall go clear. I had seen a distant headland past the extreme edge of the promontory, and as we looked we could see grow the intervening coastline and what were evidently a deep cove. At the same time there broke upon our ears a continuing and mighty bellowing. It partook of the magnitude and volume of distant thunder, that come to us directly from leeward, rising above the crash of the surf and travelling directly in the teeth of the storm. As we passed the point, the old cove burst upon our view, an half-moon and white sandy beach upon which broke a huge surf, which were covered up with a myriad of seals. It was from then that the great bellowing went up. A rookery, I cried. Now we are indeed safe. There must be men and cruisers to protect them from the seal hunters. Perhaps there's a station ashore. As I studied the surf which beat upon the beach, I said, still bad, but not so bad. And now, if the gods be truly calm, we shall drift by that next headland and come upon a perfectly sheltered beach, where we may land without wetting our feet. And the gods were kind. The first and second headlands were directly in line with the southwest wind. Once around the second, and we were perilously near, we picked up the third headland, still in line with the wind, and with the other two. The cove that intervened, it penetrated deep into the land, and the tide setting in drifted us under the shelter of the point. Here the sea were calm, save for an heavy but smooth ground swell, and I took in the sea anchor and began to row. From the point the shore curved away more and more to the south and west, until at last it disclosed a cove within the cove, a little landlocked harbour, the water level as a pond, broken only by tiny ripples where vagrant breaths and wisps of the storm hurtled down from over the frowning wall of rock, and back to the beach 100 feet inshore. Here were no seals whatever. The boat's stem touched the hard shingle. I sprang out, extending my hand to Maud. The next moment she would be beside me. As my fingers released hers, she clutched for my arm hastily. At the same moment I swayed and was about to fall on the sand. This was the startling effect of the cessation of movement. We had been so long upon the moving, rocking sea that the stable land were a shock to us. We expected the beach to lift up in this way and that, and the rocky walls to swing back and forth like the sides of a ship. And when we braced ourselves automatically for these various expected movements, their non-occurrence quite overcame our equilibrium. I really must sit down, Maud said with a nervous laugh and a dizzy gesture, and forthwith she sat down on the sand. I attended to making the boat secure and joined her. Thus we landed on Endeavour Island, as we came to it, land sick from long custom of the sea. That's the end of chapter 28. A spot of luck. It's odd really, it seems like they made a clean getaway, but I can't imagine they actually have, because there's about 10 chapters left. And the book is called The Sea Wolf, so it'd be strange if Wolf Larson disappeared a little more than halfway through it. Still have a quick drink and we'll press on. I'm trying to think if there's much to say about this chapter. I suppose there's some consideration of the facing of death, the actions he takes as he expects himself to be broken upon the rocks. But I don't think so much else other than that. Yeah, I don't think much else other than that at all, really. I mean, I suppose there's also the reflection on how it'd be wrong of him to pronounce his love to Maud while she's relying on him. I can respect that. Not want to impose on someone when they need you. Anyhow, don't think there's much else to say, so we'll press on. Chapter 29. Fool, I cried aloud in my vexation. I had unloaded the boat and carried its contents high up on the beach when I had set about making camp. There were driftwood, though not much, on the beach, and the sight of a coffee tin I had taken from the ghost larder had given me the idea of a fire. Blithering idiot, I was continuing. Maud said tut-tut in gentle reproval, and then asked why I blew her an idiot. No matches, I groaned. Not a match did I bring. Now we shall have no hot coffee, soup, tea, or anything. Wasn't it, Crusoe who rubbed sticks together? She drawled. But I've read the personal narratives of a score of shipwrecked men who tried in vain, I answered. I remember Winters, a newspaper fellow with an Alaskan and Siberian reputation. Met him at the Bibelor once. They were telling us how he attempted to make a fire with a couple of sticks. It was most amusing. He told it inimitably, but it was the story of a failure. I remember his conclusion, his black eyes flashing as he said, "Gentlemen, the South Sea Islanders may do it, the Malay may do it, but take my word, it is beyond the white man." "Oh well, we've managed so far without it," she said cheerfully. "And there's no reason why we cannot still manage without it." "But think of the coffee," I cried. "It's good coffee too, I know. I dug it from Larson's private stores. And look at that good wood." I confess I wanted the coffee badly, and I learned not long afterwards that the berry were likewise a little weakness of Maud's. Besides, we had been so long on cold diet that we were numb, inside as well as out. Anything warm would have been most gratifying, but I complained no more and set about making a tent of the sail for Maud. I had looked upon it as a simple task, what with the oars, mast, boom, and sprit, to say nothing of plenty of lines. As though we were without experience, and every detail were an experiment, and every successful detail an invention, the day were well gone and our shelter were an accomplished fact. And then the night, it rained, and she was flooded out and driven back into the boat. Next morning I dug a shallow ditch around the tent. An hour later a sudden gust of wind, whipping over the rocky wall behind us, picked up the tent and smashed it down on the sand 30 yards away. Maud laughed at my crestfallen expression, and I said, "As soon as the wind abates, I intend to go into the boat to explore the island. There must be a station somewhere, and men. Ships must visit the station. Some government must protect all these seals, but I wish to have you comfortable before I start." "I should like to go with you," was all she said. "It would be better if you remained. You had enough of hardship, and it's a miracle you survived. I won't be comfortable in the boat, rowing and sailing in this rainy weather. What you need is rest, and I should like you to remain and get it." Something suspiciously akin to moistness dimmed her beautiful eyes before she dropped them partly and turned away her head. "I should prefer going with you," she said in a low voice, in which there was just an hint of appeal. "I might be able to help you," her voice broke, "a little. And if anything should happen to you, think of me left here alone." "Oh, I intend being very careful," I answered. "I shall not go so far but I can get back before night. It's all said and done, I think it vastly better for you to remain and sleep and rest and do nothing." She turned and looked me in the eyes. Her gaze ran faltering but soft. "Please, please," she said, oh so softly. I stiffened myself to refuse and shook my head. Still she waited and looked at me. I tried to word my refusal but wavered. I saw the glad light spring into her eyes and knew that I had lost. It was impossible to say no after that. The wind died down in the afternoon and we were prepared to start the following morning. We were no way of penetrating the island from our cove, for the walls rose perpendicularly from the beach and on either side of it. The cove rose from the deep water. Morning broke, dull and grey, but calm, and I were awake early and had the boat in readiness. "Fool! Imbecile! Yahoo!" I shouted, when I thought it would meet to arouse Maud. This time I shouted in merriment as I danced about the beach bareheaded in mock despair. Her head appeared under the flap of the sail. "What now?" she asked sleepily and with curiosity. "Coffee," I cried. "What do you say to a cup of coffee? Hot coffee, piping hot?" "My," she murmured, "you startled me, and you are cruel. Here I have been composing myself to do without it, and here you are vexing me with your vain suggestions." "What's me?" I said. From under clefts around the rock I gathered a few dry sticks and chips. These I whittled in shavings or split in the kindling. From my notebook I tore out a page, and from the ammunition box took a shotgun shell. Removing the wads from the latter with my knife, I emptied the powder onto a flat rock. Next I pried the primer or cap from the shell and laid it on the rock in the midst of the scattered powder. All were ready. Maud still watched from the tent. Holding the paper in my left hand, I smashed down upon the cap with the rock held in my right. There were a puff of white smoke, a burst of flame, and the rough edge of the paper were alight. Maud clapped her hands gleefully. "Prometheus!" she cried. Bar were too occupied to acknowledge her delight. The feeble flame must be cherished tenderly if it would gather strength and live. I fed it, shaving by shaving and sliver by sliver, till at last it was snapping and crackling, and it laid hold of the smaller chips and sticks. We cast away on an island did not enter my calculation, so we were without kettle or cooking utensil of any sort. But I made shift with a tin used for bailing the boat, and later, as we consumed our supply of canned goods, we accumulated quite an imposing array of cooking vessels. I boiled the water, but it was Maud who made the coffee. And how good it was! My contribution was canned beef fried with crumbled sea biscuit and water. The breakfast was a success, and we sat about the fire much longer than enterprising explorers should have done, sipping the hot black coffee and talking over our situation. I'm confident we should find the station in some one of the coves, for I knew that the rookeries of the Bering Sea were thus guarded. But more advanced the theory, prepare me for disappointment, I do believe, if disappointment were to come, that we had discovered an unknown rookery. She were in very good spirits, however, and made quite merry in accepting our plight as grave one. If you are right, I said, that we must prepare the winter here. Our food will not last, but there's the seals. I go away in the fall, so I must soon begin to lay in a supply of meat. Then there will be huts to build and driftwood to gather. Also, we shall try out seal fat for lighting purposes. Altogether, we'll have our hands full if we find the islands uninhabited, which we shall not, I know. But she were right. We sail with a beam wind along the shore, searching the coves with our glasses and landing occasionally without finding a sign of human life. Yet we learned that we were not the first who had landed on Dever Island. High up on the beach of the second cove from ours, we discovered the splintered wreck of a boat. Oh, hello, Abbe. Good to have you. Where are we? We're just partway into the third chapter of the evening, so you're not missed too much. But I can give you. Hey, Abby. Ah, you got the little plant. You are truly a loyal and devoted friend and follower. I appreciate it. What was this? But yeah, we're partway into the second chapter of the thing. I'll give you a quick summary. From where they left on the boat, they had a little bit of rough weather, which caused them to drift and lose their bearing a bit, and then a mild storm, which were much rougher in the small boat, pushed them onto an island, a rookery in the Bering Sea somewhere, and they have just managed to figure out how to make a fire using a rifle or a shotgun shell, because they didn't bring matches, and not breakfast, and now sailing to explore the island, which they have now found is uninhabited, much to their disappointment. And they're laying in plans to winter there, which seems foolish, but we'll see how it gets on. Yeah, happy to have you. But she were right. We sail with a beam wind along the shore, searching the coves with our glasses and landing occasionally without finding a sign of human life. Yet we learned that we were not the first who had landed on Endeavour Island. High up on the beach of the second cove from ours, we discovered the splintered wreck of a boat. A sealer's boat, for the rowlocks were bound in Senate, a gun rack were on the starboard side of the bow, and in white letters were faintly visible, Gazelle Number 2. The boat had lain there for a long time, for it were half filled with sand, and the splintered wood had the weather-worn appearance due to long exposure in the elements. In the stern sheets I found a rusty 10-gauge shotgun and a sailor's sheath knife, broken short across, and so rusted as to be almost unrecognisable. They got away, I said cheerfully, but I felt a sinking in the heart, and seemed to divine the presence of bleached bones somewhere on that beach. I did not wish more spirits to be dampened by such a find, so I turned seaward again with our boat and skirted the north-eastern point of the island. There were no beaches on the southern shore, and by early afternoon we rounded the black promontory and completed the circumnavigation of the island. I estimated its circumference at 25 miles, its width as varying from 2 to 5 miles, while the most conservative calculations placed on its beaches 200,000 seals. The island were highest in its extreme southwest point, the headlands and backbone diminishing regularly until the northeast portion were only a few feet above the sea. With the exception of our little cove, the other beaches sloped gently back for a distance of half a mile or so, in what I might call rocky meadows, with here and there patches of moss and tundra grass. Here the seals hauled out, and by the old bulls guarded their harems, while the young bulls hauled out by themselves. This brief description is all the Endeavour Island merits. Damp and soggy were it not sharp and rocky, buffeted by storm winds and lashed by the sea, with the air continually a-tremble with the bellowing of 200,000 amphibians, it were a melancholy and miserable sojourning place. Maud, who had prepared me for disappointment, and who had been as sprightly and vivacious all day, broke down as we landed in our own little cove. She strove bravely to hide it from me, but while I was kindling another fire, I knew she was stifling her sobs at the blankets under the sail tent. It was my turn to be cheerful, and I played the part to the best of my ability, and with all such success that I brought the laughter back into her dear eyes, the song on her lips, as she sang to me before we went to an early bed. It was the first time I had heard her sing, and I lay by the fire listening and transported, for she were nothing if not an artist in everything she did, and her voice, though not strong, were wonderfully sweet and expressive. I still slept in the boat, and I lay awake along that night, gazing up at the first stars. I had seen in many nights, and pondering the situation. Responsibility of this sort were a new thing to me. Wolf Larson had been quite light. I had stood on my father's legs. My lawyers and agents had taken care of my money for me. I had no responsibilities at all. Then on the Ghost I had learned to be responsible for myself. And now, for the first time in my life, I found myself responsible for someone else. It required of me that this should be the gravest of responsibilities. Was she the one woman in the world, one small woman, as I love to think of her? Oh, and that's the end of chapter 29. Right, so we've had an exploration of the island, which seems a desolate and uninhabitable rock. And yeah, they seem, I suppose, resigned to stay there, at least over the winter, which will be rough, but I suppose they're waiting for a better weather. The spring or perhaps summer would be the easiest time to ship out, and they struggled enough on the boat, as it were. So, I can see it. And they've got access to fire now, which is something. And there's plenty of seals, so they wouldn't be starving, although I don't know how nutritious a seal is. They certainly stand at risk of scurvy, if nothing else. I think that's all I have to say, so quick drink of water and then we'll press on. Right. Chapter 30. No wonder we called it Endeavour Island. The 2 weeks we toured it building up, Maud insisted in helping, and I could have wept over her bruised and bleeding hands. And still I were proud of her because of it. There was something heroic about this gently bred woman enduring our terrible hardship, and with her pittance of strength bending the task of a peasant woman. She gathered many of the stones which I built into the walls of the hut. Also she turned a deaf ear to my entreaties when I begged her to desist. She compromised, however, by taking upon herself the lighter labours of cooking and gathering driftwood and moss for our winter supply. The hut's walls rose without difficulty, and everything went smoothly until the problem of the roof confronted me. What use the 4 walls without a roof? And what could a roof be made? There were the spare oars, very true. They would serve as roof beams. But with what was I to cover them? Moss would never do. Tundra grass are impracticable. We needed the sail for the boat, and the tarpaulin had begun to leak. Winters use walrus skins on his hut, I said. There are the seals, she suggested. So the next day the hunting began. I did not know how to shoot, but I proceeded to learn. And while I expended some 30 shells for 3 seals, I decided the ammunition would be exhausted before I acquired the necessary knowledge. I had used 8 shells for lighting fires before I hit upon the device of banking the embers with wet moss. Then there remained not over 100 shells in the box. I must club the seals, I announced, when convinced of my poor marksmanship. I've heard the sealers talk about clubbing them. They're so pretty, she objected. I cannot bear to think of being done. It's so directly brutal, you know, so different from shooting them. The roof must go on, I answered grimly. Winter is almost here. It is our lives against theirs. It is unfortunate we haven't plenty of ammunition, but I think anyway they suffer less from being clubbed than from being shot up. Besides, I should do the clubbing. That's just it, she began eagerly and broke off in sudden confusion. Of course, I began, if you prefer. And what shall I be doing? She interrupted with a softness I knew full well to be insistence. Having firewood and cooking dinner, I answered her lightly. She shook her head. It's too dangerous for you to attempt alone. I know, she waved my protest. I'm only a weak woman. Just my small assistance may enable you to escape disaster. With the clubbing, I suggested. Of course you will do that. I shall probably scream. I'll look away when the danger is most serious, I laughed. I shall use my judgment when to look and when not to look, she replied with a grand air. The upshot of the affair was that she accompanied me next morning. I rode into the adjoining cove and up to the edge of the beach. There were seals all about us in the water, and the bellowing thousand on the beach compelled us to shout at each other to make ourselves heard. I know men clubbed them, I said, trying to reassure myself, gazing doubtfully as a large bull, not 30 feet away, upreared in his foreflippers and regarded me intently. The question is, how do they club them? Let's gather tender grass and thatch the roof, Maud said. She were frightened as I at the prospect, and we had reason to be, gazing at close range at the gleaming teeth and dog-like mouths. I always thought they were afraid of men, I said. How do I know they're not afraid? I queried a moment later, after having rowed a few more strokes along the beach. Perhaps if I would have stepped boldly ashore, they would cut for it, and I could not catch up with one. And still I hesitated. I heard of a man once who invaded the nesting grounds of wild geese, Maud said. They killed him. The geese? Yes, the geese. My brother told me about it when I was a little girl. But I know men clubbed them, I persisted. I think the tundra grass will make just as good a roof, she said. Far from her intentions, her words were maddening me, driving me on. I could not play the coward before her eyes. Here goes, I said, back in the water with one oar and running the bow ashore. I stepped out and advanced vigilantly upon a long-maned bull in the midst of his wives. I were armed with the regular club with which the boat pullers killed the wounded seals gaffed aboard by the hunters. They were only 1.5 feet long, and in my superb ignorance I never dreamed that the club used ashore when Weyden rookeries measured 4 to 5 feet. The cows lumbered out of my way, and the distance between me and the bull decreased. He raised himself on his flippers with an angry movement. We were a dozen feet apart. Still I advanced steadily, looking for him to turn a tail at any moment and run. At 6 feet, the panic you thought rushed into my mind. What if he will not run? Why, then I shall club him, came the answer. In my fear, I had forgotten that I were there to get the bull instead of make him run. And just then he gave a snort and a snarl and rushed at me. His eyes were blazing, his mouth was wide open, the teeth gleamed cruelly white. Without shame, I confess it was that it were I who turned and footed it. He ran awkwardly, but he ran well. He was but 2 paces behind when I tumbled into the boat, and as I shoved off with the oar, his teeth crunched down upon the blade. The stout wood would crush like an eggshell. Mod and I were astounded. A moment later, he had dived under the boat, seized the keel in his mouth, and was shaking the boat violently. "My," said Mod, "let's go back." I shook my head. I can do what other men have done, and I know that other men have clubbed seals. But I think I'll leave the bulls alone next time. "I wish you wouldn't," she said. "I don't say please, please," I cried, half angrily, I do believe. She made no reply, and I knew my tone must have hurt her. "I beg your pardon," I said, or shouted rather, in order to make myself heard over the roar of the rookery. "If you say so, I'll turn and go back, but honestly, I'd rather stay." "I don't say that this is what you get for bringing a woman along," she said. She smiled at me whimsically, gloriously, and I knew there were no need for forgiveness. I rowed a couple 100 feet along the beach so as to recover my nerves, and then stepped ashore again. "Do be cautious," she called after me. I nodded my head and proceeded to make a flank attack on the nearest iron. All went well until I aimed a blow at an outlying cow's head and fell short. She snorted and tried to scramble away. I ran in close and struck another blow, hitting the shoulder instead of the head. "Watch out!" I heard Maud scream. In my excitement, I had not been taking notice of other things, and I looked up to see the lord of the iron charging down upon me. Again I fled to the boat, hotly pursued, but this time Maud made no suggestion of turning back. "It would be better, I imagine, if you left harems alone and devoted your attention to lonely and inoffensive-looking seals," was what she said. "I think I have read something about them. Dr. Jordan's book, I believe. They're the young bulls, not old enough to have harems of their own. He called them the holoshiki or something like that. It seems to me if we find where they haul out, it seems to me that your fighting instincts are out," I laughed. She flushed quickly and prettily. "I'll admit I don't like defeat any more than you do, or any more than I like the idea of killing such pretty, inoffensive creatures." "Pretty," I sniffed. I failed to mark anything preeminently pretty about those foamy-mouthed beasts that raced me. "Your point of view," she laughed. "You lack perspective." Now, she did not have to get so close to the subject. "The very thing," I cried. "What I need is a longer club. There's that broken oar ready to hand." "It just comes to me," she said. "Captain Larson was telling me how the Wren raided the rookeries. They drive the seals in small herds a short distance inland before they kill them." "I don't care to undertake the herding of one of those harems," I objected. "They're the holoshiki," she said. "The holoshiki haul out by themselves, and Dr. Jordan says the paths are left between the harems, and as long as the holoshiki keep strictly to the path, they are unmolested by the masters of the harem." "There's one now," I said, pointing to a young bull in the water. "Let's watch him and follow him if he hauls out." He swam directly to the beach and clambered out in a small opening between 2 harems, the master of which made warning noises but did not attack him. We watched him travel slowly inland, threading about among the harems along what must have been the path. "Here goes," I said, stepping out. I confess my heart were in my mouth as I thought of going through the eye of that monstrous herd. "It would be wise to make the boat fast," Maud said. She had stepped out beside me, and I regarded her with wonderment. She nodded her head determinedly. "Yes, I'm going with you, so you may as well secure the boat and arm me with a club." "Let's go back," I said dejectedly. "I think tundra grass will do after all." "You know it won't," was her reply. "Shall I leave?" With a shrug of the shoulders, but with the warmest admiration and pride at heart for this woman, I equipped her with a broken oar and took another for myself. It was with a nervous trepidation that we made the first few rods of the journey. Once Maud screamed in terror as a crow thrust an inquisitive nose towards her foot, and several times I quickened my pace for the same reason. But beyond morning coughs from either side, there were no signs of hostility. It were a rookery which had never been raided by the hunters, and in consequence the seals were mild tempers and at the same time unafraid. In the very heart of the herd, the din was terrific. It was almost dizzying in its effect. I paused and smiled reassuringly at Maud, for I had recovered my equanimity sooner than she. I could see she was still badly frightened. She came close to me and shouted, "I'm dreadfully afraid!" And I were not. Though the novelty had not yet worn off, the peaceful comportment of the seals had quieted my alarm. Maud was trembling. "I'm afraid and I'm not afraid," she shouted with shaking jaws. "It's my miserable body, not I." It's all right," I reassured her, my arm passing instinctively and protectively around her. I shall never forget in that moment how instantly conscious I became of my manhood. The primitive deep in my nature stirred. I felt myself masculine, the protector of the weak, the fighting man. And best of all, I felt myself the protector of my loved one. She leaned against me, so light and lily frail. As her trembling eased away, it seemed as though I became aware of my prodigious strength. I felt myself a match for the most ferocious bull in the herd, and I know I had such a bull charged upon me that I should have met it unflinchingly and quite coolly, and I know that I should have killed it. I'm all right now, she said, looking at me gratefully. Let us go on. And the strength in me had quieted her and given her confidence filled me with exultant joy. The youth of the race seemed burgeoning in me, over-civilised man that I was, and I lived for myself in the old hunting days and forest nights of my remote and forgotten ancestry. I had much for which to thank Wolf Larson with my thought as we went along the path between the jostling irons. A quarter of a mile inland, we come upon the Holashiki, sleek young bulls living out the loneliness of their bachelorhood and gathering strength against the day when they would fight their way into the ranks of the Benedicts. Everything now went smoothly. I seemed to know just what to do and how to do it. Shouting, making threatening gestures with my club, and even prodding the lazy ones, I quickly cut out a score of the young bachelors from their companions. When anyone made an attempt to break back towards the water, I headed off. Maud took an active part in the drive, and with her cries and flourishing of the broken oar were of considerable assistance. I noticed, though, that whenever one looked tired and lagged, she let it slip past. I noticed also whenever one with a show of fight tried to break past, that her eyes glinted and showed pride, and she rapped it smartly with her club. Mine's exciting, she cried, pausing from sheer weakness. I think I'll sit down. I drove the little herd, a dozen strong now, one of the escapees she'd permitted, 100 yards further on. By the time she joined me, I had finished the slaughter and were beginning to skim. An hour later, we went proudly back along the path between the irons. And twice again we come down the path, bourbon with skin, till I thought we had enough to roof the yacht. I set the sail, laid one tack out over the cove, and on the other tack made her own little inner cove. Just like homecoming, Maud said as I ran the boat ashore. I heard her words with a responsive thrill. They were all so dearly intimate and natural, and I said, seems as though I've lived this life always. The world of books and bookish folk is very vague, more like a dream, a memory than an actuality. I surely have hunted a forehead and fought all the days of my life. And you too seem part of it. You are on the verge of saying my woman, my mate. It glibly changed it to stand in the hardship well. But her ear had caught the floor. She recognised the flight She recognised the flight that midmost broke. She gave me a quick look. Not that. You were saying that the American Mrs. Maynard will live in the life of a savage and living it quite successfully, I said easily. Ah, was all she replied. I could have sworn there were a note of disappointment in her voice. But my woman, my mate, kept ringing in my head for the rest of the day and for many days. You know that it ring more loudly than that? And that night, as I watched her draw back the blanket of moss from the coals, blow up on the fire and cook the evening meal. Must have been latent savagery stirring up in me, for the old words, so bound up with the roots of the race, had gripped me and thrilled me. And grip and thrill they did, till I fell asleep, murmuring to myself, over and over again. That's the end of chapter 30. A fair play to them, they managed to succeed in their little trip, which is, I suppose it's the one thing standing between them and making it through the winter, so fair play. It's all very sort of, I don't know. I'm struggling how to think of it, really. London is a very, very masculine author in the sense that he's very much a man's man in that way. The way he does this sort of thing, he writes about it, you can tell he's very, well, he's a traditional man in that sort of sense, very macho, very, don't know how to put it really, but, I don't know. I never really get the, he talks about the ancestral memories and all that. I can't say I've ever really experienced that, but then, I suppose I'm a rat, maybe that's just me. Maybe all humans do. I think dogs as well, at least by his account, do it. But, don't know what else, don't know who else. Still, they managed their little game of seal clubbing, which I believe is a famously brutal thing that people don't like nowadays, which is fair enough. Clubbing's a very bad way to go out, I'm sure. They managed it, they've got the stuff they need for their roof, they figured out the fire. They're all set to survive the old hardships of being stranded on an island, go back to nature and become more wild creatures, eh? Still, I suspect at some point Wolf Larson must come back. It would seem strange for the book to be named after him and lack so much of him, so we'll see. We'll see. But I think we're in about the final quarter of it now, so things must be going ahead one way or another soonish. Yeah, I think we'll push on for at least one more chapter, maybe two, and then we'll see how we feel. My voice is better than it were yesterday, but it's still a little bit touch and go. I don't want to strain it. I need to let it get better if I'm going to keep doing these. So, little drop of water again, and we press on. Chapter 31. It will smell, I said. It will keep the heat. It will keep the heat and keep out the rain and snow. We were surveying the completed sealskin roof. It's clumsy, but will serve the purpose, and that's the main thing, I went on, yearning for her praise. And she clapped her hands and declared that she were hugely pleased. It's dark in there, she said the next moment, her shoulders shrinking with a little involuntary shiver. Might have suggested a window when the walls were going up, I said. It were for you and you should have seen the need of the window. I never do see the obvious, you know, she laughed back. And besides, you can knock a hole in the wall at any time. Quite sure I'd not thought of it, I replied, wagging my head sagely. But have you thought of ordering the window glass? School at the firm, red 4451 I think it is, and tell them what size and kind of glass you wish. That means she began. No window. It were a dark and evil appearing thing, the up, not fit for aught better than swine in civilised land. But for us, who had known the misery of the open boat, it were a snug little habitation. Following the housewarming, which were accompanied by means of seal oil and a wick made from cotton calkin, coming the hunter for our winter's meat, and the building of the second hut. It were a simple affair now to go forth in the morning and return by noon with a boatload of seals, and then, while I worked at building the hut, Maud tried out the oil from the blubber and kept a slow fire under the frames of meat. I had heard of jerking beef on the plains, and our seal meat, cut in thin strips and hung in the smoke, cured excellently. The second hut were easier to erect, and I built it against the first, and only 3 walls were required. But it will work, hard work, all of it. Maud and I worked from dawn till dusk, at the limit of our strength, so that when night come we crawled stiffly to bed, and let the animal light sleep of exhaustion. And yet Maud declared that she had never felt better or stronger in her life. I know this was true of myself, but hers was such a lily strength that I feared she would break down. Often and often, her last reserve force gone, I had seen her stretched flat on her back in the sand, in the way she had her resting and recuperating. And then she would be on her feet and toiling hard as ever. Where she obtained this strength were a marvel to me. Think of the long rest this winter, was her reply to my remonstrances there. I would be clamorous for something to do. The old house woman in my hut, the night it were roofed. It was the end of the 3rd day of a fierce storm, which had swung around the compass from the south-east to the north-west, and which were then blowing directly upon us. The beaches of our outer cove were thundering with the surf, and even in our landlocked inner cove a respectable sea were breaking. No, our backbone of Ireland sheltered us from the wind, and it whistled and bellowed about the hut at all times. I feared for the strength of the walls. The skim roof, stretched tightly as a drumhead, I had thought, sagged and belly with every gust, and innumerable interstices in the walls, not so tightly stuffed with moss as Maud had supposed, disclosed themselves. Yet the seal oil burned brightly, and we were warm and comfortable. It was a pleasant evening indeed, and we voted that as our social function on Endeavour Island. We voted that as a social function on Endeavour Island. It had not yet been eclipsed. Our minds were at ease. Not only resigned ourselves to the bitter winter, but we were prepared for it. The seals could depart on their mysterious journey into the south at any time now, for all we cared, and the storms held no terror for us. Not only were we sure of being dry and warm and sheltered from the wind, but we had the softest and most luxurious mattress that could be made from moss. This had been Maud's idea, and she had herself jealously gathered all the moss. This would have been my first night on the mattress, and I knew I should sleep the sweeter because she had made it. As she rose to go, she turned to me with a whimsical way she had and said, "Something is going to happen. It's happening, for that matter. I feel it. Something is coming here to us. It's coming now. I don't know what, but it's coming." "Good or bad?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, but it's there somewhere." She pointed in the direction of the sea and wind. "It's a lee shore," I laughed, "and I'm sure I'd rather be here than I'd rather in a night like this." "You're not frightened?" I asked, as I stepped on the open door for her. Her eyes looked bravely into mine. "And you feel well, perfectly well?" "Never better," was her answer. We talked a little longer before she went. "Good night, Maud," I said. "Good night, Humphry," she said. The use of our given names had come about quite as a matter of course, and rather premeditated, as it were natural. In that moment I could have put my arms around her and drawn her to me. I should certainly have done so out in the world, that world to which we belonged. As it were, the situation stopped there in the only way it could. But I was left alone in my little hut, glowing warmly through and through with a pleasant satisfaction. I knew that a tie or a tacit something existed between us which had not existed before. That's the end of chapter 31. That was quite a short one, so I guess we will press on for another one, but let's have a little bit of contemplation. And here we have sort of a homestead action, a building up of how would you say, relationship. I mean, in a very literal way, they're making a home together. It is arguably the steps of a relationship, with the sort of stepping around and the disappointed look from last chapter. I imagine there's some mutual feelings going on there, but of course neither of them will realise it, being as they are characters in a book. They can't fall in love and be happily ever after till the end, otherwise there's no more story to be had. So they must dance around like fools. It's the nature of the beast. What else? They're doing pretty well. I mean, successfully smoking the meat is no small challenge. I know people die from want of the ability to do it, but then I suppose they are characters in a book, so that's sort of glanced over. As long as the author doesn't want there to be a problem, there's not. And cool that they're kind of drafty and the roof isn't as tight as they'd like it to be. Their shelters are open up. So it all seems to be going fairly well. No problems, but something predestined to come from the sea. I have my little drink, and then one we will read on there. Chapter 32. I awoke oppressed by a mysterious sensation. There seemed something missing in my environment, but the mystery and oppressiveness vanished after the first few seconds of waking. When I identified the missing something as the wind, I had fallen The mystery and oppressiveness vanished after the first few seconds of waking, when I identified the missing something as the wind. I had fallen asleep in that state of nerve tension with which one meets the continuous shock of sound or movement, and I had awakened, still tense, bracing myself to meet the pressure of something which no longer bore upon me. It was the first night I had spent under cover in several months, and I lay luxuriously for some minutes under my blankets, once not wet with fog or spray, analysing first the effect produced upon me by the cessation of the wind, and next the joy which my arm for resting on the mattress made by Maud's hands. When I dressed and opened the door, I heard the waves still lapping on the beach, garrulously attesting the fury of the night. It was a clear day and the sun was shining. I had slept late, and I stepped outside with sudden energy, bent upon making up lost time as befitted a dweller on Endeavour Island. And when outside, I stopped short. I believed my eyes without question, and yet I was for the moment stunned by what they disclosed to me. There on the beach, not 50 feet away, bow on, dismasted, with a black old vessel, mast and booms tangled with shrouds, sheets and rent canvas, were rubbing gently alongside. I could have rubbed my eyes as I looked. There were the homemade galley as we had built, the familiar break of the poop, the low yacht cabin scarcely rising above the rail. It was a ghost. What freak of fortune had brought her here of all spots? What chances? I looked in the bleak, inaccessible wall at my back. I knew the profundity of despair. Escape were hopeless, out of the question. I thought of moored asleep there in the hut we had reared. I remembered a "Good night, Humphry." My woman, my mate, went ringing through my brain. But now, alas, for a knell that sounded, and everything went black before my eyes. Possibly it was the fraction of a second, but I had no knowledge of how long an interval had lapsed before I was myself again. There lay the ghost, bow on the beach, a splintered bowsprit projecting over the sand, the tangled spars rubbing against her side to the lift of the crooning waves. Something must be done. It came upon me suddenly, and strange that nothing moved aboard. Wearied from the night of struggle and wreck, all hands were yet asleep, I thought. My next thought was that Maud and I might yet escape, if we could take to the boat and make round the point before anyone awoke. I'll call her and start. My arm was lifted at the door to knock when I recollected the smallness of the island. We could never hide ourselves upon it. There were nothing for us but the wide raw ocean. I thought of our snug little huts, our supplies of meat and oil and moss and firewood, and I knew we could never survive the wintry sea and the great storms which would have come. So I stood with hesitant knuckle without our door. It was impossible. A wild thought of rushing in and killing her as she slept rose in my mind, and then in a flash the better solution came to me. All hands were asleep. Why not creep aboard the ghost? Well, I knew the way to Wolf Larson's bunk and kill him dead in his sleep. After that, we would see. With him dead, there were time and space in which to prepare to do other things. And besides, whatever new situation arose, it could not possibly be worse than the present one. My knife were at my hip. I turned my up for the shotgun, made sure it were loaded, and went down with the Ghost. With some difficulty and the expense of wetting to the waist, I climbed aboard. The forecastle scuttle were open. I paused to listen for the breathing of the men, but there were no breathing. I almost gasped as the thought came to me. What if the Ghost is deserted? I listened more closely. There were no sound. I cautiously descended the ladder. The place had the empty and musty feel and smell, usual to a dwelling no longer inhabited. Everywhere a thick layer of discarded and ragged garments, old sea boots, leaky oilskins, all the worthless forecastle dunnage of a long voyage. Abandoned hastily were my conclusion as I ascended to the deck. Hope were alive again in my breast, and I looked about me with greater coolness. I noted the boats were missing. The steerage told the same tale as the forecastle. The owners had packed their belongings with similar haste. The Ghost were deserted. It were Maud's and mine. I thought of the ship's stores and the lazarette beneath the cabin, and the idea came to me of surprising Maud with something nice for breakfast. The reaction from my fear and the knowledge that the terrible deed I had come to do were no longer necessary made me boyish and eager. I went up the steerage companionway 2 steps at a time with nothing distinct in my mind except joy and the hope that Maud would sleep on until the surprise breakfast were quite ready for her. As I rounded the galley, a new satisfaction reminded me at the thought of it all, of all the splendid cooking utensils inside. I sprang up the break of the poop and saw Wolf Larson. All of my impetus and the stunning surprise, I clattered 3 or 4 steps along the deck before I could stop myself. He was standing in the companionway, only his head and shoulders visible, staring straight at me. His arms were resting on the half-open slide. He made no movement whatever, simply stood there staring at me. I began to tremble. The old stomach sickness clutched me. I put one of my hands on the edge of the house to steady myself. My lips seemed suddenly dry and I moistened them against the need of speech, nor did I for an instant take my eyes off him. Neither of us spoke. There was something ominous in his silence, his immobility. All my old fear of him returned, and my new fear were increasing 100-fold. And still we stood, the pair of us staring at each other. I were aware of the demand for action, and my old hope was strong upon me. I were waiting for him to take the initiative. Then, as the moments went by, it came to me that the situation were analogous to the one in which I had approached the long maned bull, and my intention of clubbing him obscured by fear, until it became desire to make him run. So it were at last impressed upon me that I were there, not to have Wolf Larson take the initiative, but to take it myself. I cocked both barrels and levelled the shotgun at him. Had he moved, attempted to drop down the companionway, I knew I would have shot him. But he stood motionless and staring as before. And as I faced him with levelled gun shaking in hands, I had time to note the worn and haggard appearance of his face. It was as if some strong anxiety had wasted it. The cheeks were sunken, and there were a wearied, puckered expression on the brow. It seemed to me that his eyes were strange, not only the expression but the physical seeming, as though the optical nerves and supporting muscles had suffered strain and slightly twisted the eyeballs. All this I saw in my brain, now working rapidly. I thought 1,000 thoughts, and yet I could not pull the trigger. I lowered the gun and stepped to the corner of the cabin, primarily to relieve the tension of my nerves and to make a new start, and incidentally to be closer. Again I raised the gun. He was almost at arm's length. There was no hope for him, I was resolved. There was no possible chance of missing him, no matter how poor my marksmanship. And yet I wrestled with myself, and I could not pull the triggers. "Well?" he demanded impatiently. I strove vainly to force my finger down on the trigger, and vainly I strove to say something. "Why don't you shoot?" he asked. I cleared my throat with an huskiness which prevented speech. "Hum," he said slowly, "you can't do it. You're not exactly afraid, you're impotent. Your conventional morality is stronger than you. You are the slave to the opinions which have credence among people you have known and have read about. Their code has been drummed into your head from the time you lisped. In spite of your philosophy and of what I have taught you, it won't let you kill an unarmed, unresisting man." "I know it," I said hoarsely. "And you know that I would kill an unarmed man readily as I would smoke a cigar," he went on. "You know me for what I am, my worth in the world by your standard. You have called me snake, tiger, shark, monster, and Caliban. And yet, you little rag puppet, you little echoing mechanism, you're unable to kill me as you would a snake or a shark, because I have hands, feet, and a body shaped somewhat like yours. Bah! I'd hoped better things of you, Hump." He stepped out of the companionway and came up to me. "Put down that gun. I want to ask you some question. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. What place is this? How is the Ghost lying? How did you get wet? Where's Maud? I beg your pardon, Miss Brewster, or should I say Miss Van der Weyden?" I backed away from him, almost weeping at my inability to shoot him, but not fool enough to put down the gun. I hoped desperately that he might commit some hostile act, attempt to strike me or choke me, for in such a way only I knew I could be stirred to shoot. "This is Endeavour Island," I said. "Never heard of it," he broke in. "At least that's our name for it," I amended. "Ah?" he queried. "Who's our?" "Miss Brewster and myself. And the ghost is lying, as you can see for yourself, bound to the beach." "There's seals here," he said. "They woke me up with their barking, or I'd be asleep yet. I heard them when I drove in last night. They were the first warning that I was on Lee's shore. It's a rookery, the kind of thing I've hunted for years. Thanks to my brother Death, I've lighted on a fortune. It's a mint. What's its bearing?" "I hadn't the least idea," I said. "But you ought to know quite closely. What were your last observations?" He smiled inscrutably, but did not answer. "Where's all hands?" I asked. "And it's come that you are alone." I prepared for him to again set aside my question, and was surprised at the readiness of his reply. "My brother got me inside 48 hours, and through no fault of mine. Boarded me in the night with only the watch on deck. Hunters went back on me. He gave them a bigger lay. Heard him offering it. Did it right before me. Of course the crew gave the go-by. That was to be expected. All hands went over the side, and there I was, marooned on my own vessel. It was Death's turn, and it's all in the family anyway." "How'd you lose the masts?" I asked. "Walk over and examine those lanyards," he said, pointing to where the mizzen rigging should have been. "I've been cut with a knife," I exclaimed. "Not quite," he laughed. "Here is a neater job. Look again." I looked. The lanyards had almost been severed, with just enough left to hold the shrouds till some severe strain should be put upon them. "Cookie did that," he laughed again. "I know, though I didn't spot him at it. Kind of evened up the score a bit." "Good for Mugridge," I cried. "Yes, that's what I thought when everything went over the side. Only I said it on the other side of my mouth." "What were you doing while all this was going on?" I asked. "My best, you may be sure, which wasn't much under the circumstances." I turned to re-examine Thomas Mugridge's work. "I guess I'll sit down and take the sunshine," I heard Wolf Larson saying. There and in, just a slight hint of physical feebleness in his voice. It was so strange that I looked quickly at him. His hands were sweeping nervously across his face, as though he were brushing away cobwebs. I was puzzled. The old thing was so unlike the Wolf Larson I had known. "Are your headaches?" I asked. "They still trouble me," was his answer. "I think I have one coming on now." He slipped down from his sitting posture till he lay on the deck. Then he rolled over on his side, his head resting on the biceps, on the underarm, the forearm shielding his eyes from the sun. I stood regarding him wonderingly. "Now's your chance, Hum," he said. "I don't understand," I lied, for I thoroughly understood. "Oh, nothing," he added softly, as if he were drowsy. "Only you've got me where you want me." "No, I haven't," I retorted, "for I want you 3,000 miles away from here." He chuckled, and thereafter spoke no more. He did not stir as I passed by him and went down at the cabin. I lifted the trap on the floor, but for some moments gazed dubiously into the darkness of the lazaret beneath. I hesitated to descend. What if his lying down were a ruse? Pretty, indeed, to be so caught down there like a rat. I crept softly up the companionway and peeped at him. He were lying as I'd left him. Again I went below, but before I dropped in the lazaret, I took the precaution of casting down the door in advance. At least there would be no lid to the trap. But it were all needless. I regained the cabin with a store of jams, sea biscuits, canned meats, and such things, all I could carry, and replaced the trapdoor. A peep at Wolf Larson showed me that he had not moved. A bright thought struck me. I stole into his stateroom and possessed myself of his revolvers. There were no other weapons, though I thoroughly ransacked the 3 remaining staterooms. Made sure I returned and went through the steerage and forecastle. In the galley gathered up all the sharp meat and vegetable knives. Then I bethought me of the great yachtsman's knife he always carried. I come to him and spoke to him, first softly, then loudly. He did not move. I bent over and took it from his pocket. I breathed more freely. He had no arms with which to attack me from a distance, while I, armed, could always forestall him should he attempt to grapple with me with his terrible gorilla arms. Filling a coffee pot and frying pan with part of my plunder, and taking some chinaware from the cabin pantry, I left Wolf Larson lying in the sun and went ashore. Maud was still asleep. I blew up the embers. We had not yet arranged a winter kitchen, and quite feverishly cooked the breakfasts. Towards the end I heard her moving about within the hut, making her a toilet. Just as all were ready and the coffee poured, the door opened and she come forth. "It's not fair of you," was her greeting. "You are usurping one of my prerogatives. You know you agreed that the cooking should be mine, but just this once," I pleaded. "If you promise not to do it again," she smiled. "Unless, of course, you've grown tired of my poor efforts." To my delight, she never once looked towards the beach. and I maintained the battle with such success that all unconsciously she sipped the coffee from the china cup, ate fried evaporated potatoes, and spread marmalade on her biscuit. But it could not last. I saw the surprise that come over her. She had discovered the china plate from which she were eating. She looked over the breakfast, knowing detail after detail. Then she looked at me, and her face turned slowly towards the beach. "Humphry," she said. The old unnameable terror mounted into her eyes. Is he? She quavered. I nodded my head. That's the end of chapter 32. Damn it all, I said I'd end here, but I don't want to. I want to press on. There's only 6 chapters left to it. I could probably make an end of it tonight. My throat is holding up alright. The problem is if I press on from here, there won't be enough to be worth carrying on with another night. So if I commit to it, I have to commit to it. But I think I'm enjoying this too much. It's a good one. Right, so Larson re-enters the story for as unlikely a manner as you could hope for. We have him washing up on shore after being abandoned by all of his men, and the cabin, or not the cabin, the masts scuppered by Cookie in his own petty little revenge, which is good for him. Very rat-like of him, I respect it. But yeah, what else have we got? Larson still suffering from his headaches, much diminished as a man. I do like the parallel actually that's drawn between the facing off with the bull seals as well. It's a good one because you almost have this image of Humphry Van Weyden, or Van Weyden. I don't know why I keep adding the of Humphry Van Weyden being this one of the what are they called, the younger male seals, the challengers who have to fight their way into things, and Larson being the older one, falling his way out of race and power. It's a good little image. It's fitting, really. Yeah. I don't think there's much else to say. I mean, obviously we're about to have some confrontation and excitement, but that's about where things are at. So I'll have a little drop more water, and then we'll press on. Will we? I'm torn. Yeah. It's my throat is the problem. I can feel that it's on the edge of being pressed. If I press on with it, it's going to give out. And if I hurt it again, it'll probably be a couple of days in recovering, whereas if I leave it now, I'll probably be alright tomorrow. Damn, that's annoying. That is annoying. There's a choice to be made. Here's what I'll say. I know that there's people in the chat because you said but I imagine most of you is just lurking and just being here to support me, which I do appreciate. But if that's the case, and there's no one here particularly enjoying it, I'm probably better off waiting off and finishing tomorrow. There's no one to be interrupted. It would just be for my own edification, and I'll be making things worse for myself for no benefit. So if you're here and want me to carry on, let me know. I'll give it a minute, and if no one's spoken up, then I'll call it for the night and do the sensible thing. So while we wait, let's have a little bit of thinking over the book as an whole, shall we? I'll give it a minute. It's been pretty good overall, I reckon. I've really enjoyed it. I like Jack London. Which, I mean, you'd hope so. I've read enough. There's a really good job of managing to, I don't know, convey a sense of, I don't want to say primal, I guess maybe primalness? Savageness, sort of wild. I mean, it's very fundamental to his storytelling. He does a good job of managing to balance it. And in his dog books, it's pretty natural. Obviously, they're dogs; they're not people. It's the first really long story of his that I've read where people are the main characters. And it's the first novel of his that I've read that isn't starring a dog, and it manages to do the same thing really well. You don't lose out on any of the sense of savageness or primalness because they're people thinking and feeling ones. Especially with Humphry Van Weyden, who is, I mean, by his own account, a timid and sort of cowardly man, very bookish and not all this. I mean, it's similar to Call of the Wild, where in that you see a sort of stately and proud dog who's all manners and gentleness and well tamed, becoming an animal more akin to like a wolf, and eventually really becoming a wolf. Or you see Humphry Weyden sort of becoming the same thing, falling back into himself, becoming primitive. And not always better. I sort of appreciate that. It's not a sort of underwhelming or overwhelming argument that he's becoming a better man for having done all this. He's improving in certain ways, but he's becoming worse morally. He sees himself worse in other ways. And I appreciate that. Too many stories like this are too sort of simplistic. I'm coming up here because I think we've come to the point where I know I'm not going to continue. Yeah. Too many stories like this are all about the sort of one track thing, you know? He would be, like in most stories like this, he'd become better by being less himself, and by the end, even though he rejects Wolf Larson's savagery, by becoming more primitive and brutal, he'd be a better man. But in this, you see him notice he becomes worse. I mean, I'm put in mind of the scene where he and Mugridge are sitting across from each other for 2 hours sharpening knives. Pathetic and sad, really. But at the same time, it's still very telling. And I'm glad Mugridge got his own in. I don't particularly like him, but well, no, that's not true. I don't think I would like him as a person, but I like him as a character. Pathetic and sad, but not his own fault. A miserable man in the worst way. He gets his own in. Hated by all. The rat way. I respect it. But yeah, I think if anyone's still here, they're lurking. So I think I'll call it about there. Let's see if there's anyone to raid before I make my call. Is anyone live? Blake's live, and she's streaming for mental health, so I'll push over to her. Yeah, that being the case, I'll see you all in, well, whenever I suppose. Thank you for coming, and as always, ta-ra.